Hi, I'm Dr. Milan Kohler. I am the child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist over at Behavioral Health here at Holy Family. I'm here to talk today about depression. Depression is really common. It is the most common of the psychiatric illnesses, along with anxiety. Some of the more recent statistics from the CDC as of June 2020 shows that 31% of the respondents had increased symptoms of depression and anxiety over the course of this year. 26% had trauma-related symptoms. 13% had started or increased substance abuse to deal with their depression and anxiety symptoms. And 11% of people had seriously contemplated suicide. And that rate is even higher when you take younger adults separately from the rest of the population. Well, because it's so common, there's a lot of things that can actually cause and lead to worsening of depression symptoms. There are going to be people who have a predisposition because it runs in their family, because there are hormonal changes. There's twice as much risk for being a woman just because of hormone changes, and that will go up again with menopause. There's going to be situational changes that can lead to a worsening of depression symptoms. And there's a lot of situational changes this year especially. So there's a lot of things that will lead to a worsening of those symptoms. With depression, it would look like sadness most often. You need to be sad for at least 2 weeks for a clinical diagnosis of a major depressive episode. But oftentimes you don't even notice it as sadness. Sometimes it's blah. You just have a numbness of feeling. And during those 2 weeks, there's disruptions in sleep. People will sleep a lot more, or they might sleep a lot less. There's going to be less interest in things. The fun stuff just isn't fun anymore. They don't want to do it. There's decreased interest, motivation. There isn't energy during the day. The appetite changes. People will start either stress eating, stress not eating. Either way can be seen. There's sometimes guilt, unreasonable guilt. It's not the kind of thing where you did something wrong and that's the kind of thing you're guilty for. No, this is going to be something that's completely out of proportion and not naturally something that you would feel guilty for. Sometimes, this year especially, you might feel guilty for not being sick or not being sick enough if somebody else was having a really tough time this year. There's helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness, sometimes thoughts of suicide or even hallucinations. In order to diagnose it as a major depressive episode, you only need 5 symptoms on top of the depressed mood. So you can see how common it is. And what it would look like would be, besides the sadness and not wanting to do things, a lot of people isolate. They'll stay in their room. They don't talk to people. They withdraw. They don't reach out when they normally would. They're just kind of sunken in and just not quite themselves. Some people will describe it as if there's a distance between what they usually feel and what they normally want to feel. All of that is worse this time of year especially because we're socially distanced. We don't have the same opportunities to spend time with our friends. We don't have the same outings. We don't have the things that we want to do. With the time change, with winter, with it getting darker that much sooner, a lot of our circadian rhythms are off in addition. So all of that will add to the really low, draggy kind of feeling that can happen at this time of year. So any of these symptoms, you want to be really careful about with yourself and with people that you know, because it is common and it can very quickly get even more intense. There are easy things that you can do to try to counteract some of these symptoms without necessarily having to meet a professional like me. The things that you can do on your own would be to try as best as you can to stay active. I know physically active is really difficult right now, but you want to at least be mentally active. You want to have some sort of activity in the house. That means either physical activity, exercise, I know, evil, We don't like it, but you need it. You need to have some sort of physical activity to really give you that energy during the day, especially in the afternoons when it starts getting dark. You really want to have more energy to deal with that. You want to have brighter lights in the house and around you. They have medical grade light boxes for relatively cheap on Amazon, believe it or not. You want to look for something that is rated at least 10,000 lux as a rating. Just as a for example, average room light is 300 lux. So this is really, really bright. Follow directions on the box. You don't look at it. It's meant to trick your brain into thinking it's the sun. So you'd have that in the morning, usually with the 10,000 rating box, about 10-15 minutes in the morning, off to the side a little bit. You don't look at it. It's there for your eyes to pick up the light and to reset your circadian rhythm. You can do it with bright lights at home, not necessarily just the medical grade box, but obviously you may have to have more of them in your house, since most of them, living rooms don't really have overhead lights, and most of us don't have really super bright lights. You definitely want to have more of that around right now. Vitamin D is not something that those of us in Wisconsin have a lot of. So you may want to have it formally checked and replenish in order to make sure that you don't feel draggy and run down from that. Other vitamin deficiencies you'd want to look into that are common would be like the B-complex vitamins, iron, magnesium, things like that, because those can also lead to a lot of mental slowdown and fatigue throughout the day, as well as other medical issues like anemia. Sometimes thyroid hormones you'd want to check out too. So when you do notice that the depression is bad, sometimes people have thoughts of suicide. That is something that we want to take very seriously. And it freaks people out. They don't want to talk about it. People sometimes don't want to ask about it because they're scared of what people will say. Try your best, if you have concern about that with someone, to talk about it in a neutral kind of way. You're not going to judge somebody for having these thoughts, because it's a sign of being overwhelmed. It's not a weakness. It's not something that says that you're bad, that you did something wrong. These thoughts happen, and there's a lot of people who walk around with thoughts of suicide they never act on. That's the default that their brains go to when they're really stressed out. So you want to ask, what brings on these thoughts? What kind of thoughts are they? Are you really going to act on them? What can we do to help make those thoughts go away? Because usually when the thoughts come, they're not going to stick around for a long time. Usually they're temporary. They're brought on by stress. It's a stress reaction. It's a serious stress reaction. We don't want to take it and pretend it's not there. But we don't want to freak out and then possibly make the person withdraw even more and not want to tell you about it. So you really want to identify who has these thoughts. So someone who's really depressed, someone who's really not reaching out, you want to reach out to them. See how they're doing. Make sure that they're okay, that they are getting some kind of activity, that they're getting themselves checked out to make sure there aren't physical things going on, that they have somebody to rely on as much as they can, that they have something that can be a distractor in those times. Usually we talk about things like the exercise as a distractor. You want to have whatever it is that normally makes them happy. So music, books, movies, things like that. I've had one patient say that what they really enjoyed doing was popping bubble wrap. So it really doesn't matter what makes you happy, as long as it is something that for that moment can really push past that thought of suicide and get you on the other side of it. When it doesn't go away, if it's not something that can be easily pushed aside when that moment goes past, that's when you really want to start looking into what additional help can you get. Can you start going into a therapist's office? Can you talk to a psychiatrist? Can you talk to your primary care doctor if you can't get in right away? There are crisis lines. There's the national hotline now. There's text messaging for those who don't like talking online. There are always ways to deal with this that don't always have to be scary. If that's not enough, then the next step would be trying to call 911 or going to an emergency room. You always want to be erring on the side of caution to be safe. That's the biggest point. You want to let people know that they're not alone and that you are there to help them be safe. So if that's something that you really feel worried about, if the person that you're worried about or yourself, you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody in person, find somebody who can do that for you, because that's okay. It happens more often than you think and more often than you're afraid of. And at this point especially, we really want you to be safe and everyone around you to be safe.